Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Raphael, and I'm going to do a little something different today. I am proposing to myself that I need to switch over from Windows 10 to Linux. That is a proposal to see how far can I get with Linux and see if it's a viable option at this point in time. With the start of the new year, I figured I'm going to switch over from my Windows 10 laptop to running to Linux, I should say. Now, currently I'm using Windows 10 and I'm hesitant on going with Windows 11. Windows 10 has the perfect start menu, the UI, when you right click options, it's all there. Very streamlined, very efficient. The UI under Windows 11, Microsoft have added extra steps onto your right click mouse options. You always have to click on show more. The start menu is a little bit more different, and they're trying to copy essentially from what I've seen Mac and Linux with the start menu being in the center of everything. Now, Windows is great for gaming, editing, pretty much primarily for anything they can think of. It's pretty much click and use essentially. I primarily use personally open source apps such as Firefox, Thunderbird, mRemote NG, so forth. Stuff like that. Nextcloud. I'm a big proponent of a Nextcloud sync thing as well. A lot of great projects out there that I can't list them all right now. Now, I figure since I use a lot of open source apps, the transition going over to Linux would be an easier one. Now, why Linux? It's open source, it's free. You can modify it freely and customize it freely to your liking. If there are so many distributions, many types of Linux flavors, there are plenty of choices in desktops such as GNOME Desktop, a KDE, Plasma, Cosmic, and so forth. For a non-Linux user, it just means how the layout is when you start using Linux. It's not just a standard Mac option or the standard Windows option. There are plenty of different flavors out there. As you can see during my installation with Ubuntu, the dock at the very bottom, I like that type of approach myself for my productivity. The App Store under Linux, there's no login. You don't have to sign in with anything. And there are multiple flavors for the App Store. I prefer using the flat pack over the snap pack. There are cons and pros for each one. When it comes to security, Linux is very known for being secure and not giving you a lot of errors and so forth. With security and the lack of keeping track of your activities, Windows is very intrusive and wants to know everything you do on your computer. Even though you paid for Windows, you only are leasing the operating system. Now, with Windows, currently you will see ads and a big push to have a Microsoft account with Windows 11. I very much dislike this idea. With Linux, there is no signing in with any account. Local accounts are great. You can join your Linux computer to a Windows domain, which is great. You can do the same thing with Mac as well. Currently, right now with Windows 11, when you are installing the operating system, Windows is actively trying to hide the local account creation during the installation process, so you have to sign in with a Microsoft account. I only assume it's going to get worse in the future. I'm not saying doom and gloom, I'm just saying they're pushing for you to log in. When you log in, Microsoft will keep track of what you do on your own computer. So much for privacy. My life's not that important. And the old saying goes, if you have nothing to hide, don't worry about it. No, it's more about nobody should know what you're doing. It's between you and your computer, that's it. Now, some of the cons of Linux during my time of using Linux, I had installed different types of Linux, primarily Ubuntu based, or I should say Debian based, ultimately. I've installed Ubuntu Desktop, Ubuntu Budgie, and then I landed on PopOS, which is Ubuntu based. I love PopOS. I love the layout. I love how it works. It's just very simplistic, not over the top complicated, not too many submenus, just A to B. Love it. Now, some of the cons issues that I've dealt with when running with any variety of Linux is there are compatibility issues, needless to say. Can you install Windows apps on Linux? Yes, the majority of the time. Yes, the main important is to install Windows applications. It's only done through compatibility. Can you install Microsoft Office? Yes. Can you install any other software? Majority of the time is going to be a 50-50 at best. Nothing concrete 100% out of the box, okay? Let's see here. The other thing too with some of the issues with Linux for me was on my Epson network printer, I can network print, network scan on my Windows machines as well as my Mac machines. But under Linux, I can only network print, but I cannot do scan. Also for the document scanner from Brother, I have to really dig down and find that application because Brother themselves do not make a dedicated Linux driver for my document scanner. I had to go find a third party and it kind of worked. The other thing too is when it comes to OBS, recording, video streaming, video editing, the number one issue is codecs. Codecs are my number one issue because under Linux, they are built by third parties and not by the GPU manufacturer. So when you're prepping and setting up your OBS stream or Handbrake or video editing, you will always see under Linux a codec called VAVI, V-A-V-I. While if you're working on the Windows side, it'll always say AMD H.264, H.265 codec, which is more streamlined and it just works out of the box. The add-ons for OBS are now one-to-one compared to Windows. There's more add-ons for OBS through the Windows side than it is for Linux. Sometimes the apps from the App Store do not work and or outdated. So you have to manually install via command line. One example is draw.io. Draw.io files would not open under Linux. When I double clicked on them, but under Windows it was flawless every time. Each file under Windows would automatically open up draw.io, not the same behavior under Linux. The battery under Windows, it runs a lot more efficient than it does on Linux. Linux runs lighter in processes, but not as efficient on battery life. I would always catch myself running low on battery compared to when it's running Windows. One of the other thing too is VPNs. Under Windows, I am able to install and set up WireGuard and open VPN with no issues. Under Linux, to get WireGuard installed, it just takes a little extra command line. And for the newbies out there, the people that are starting fresh from Linux, it may seem like it's overwhelming at times. OpenVPN is built into Linux, so all you would have to do is copy and upload the config file, and that's pretty much it. It's all built in to Linux, which is pretty good, but if you prefer WireGuard like I do, it's just better to stick with Windows on that point. But in conclusion, Linux is getting better. I will try again in the future, but currently right now, just that last 5% is just what's kind of deterring me from it. If it works for you, great. I'm not deterring anybody from not trying Linux. Everybody's going to be different. But the thing where it gives me hope is with Valve's Steam Deck. I have purchased the Steam Deck OLED model back in November, and it's such a great operating system with so much potential. On my Steam Deck, I was able to configure the desktop mode with all my apps, VPN, and it works. Granted, it's OpenVPN, not WireGuard. I would have to make some concessions. But overall, Arch has been a great experience under SteamOS. With Ubuntu, it's smooth, but there's still a few things that don't work well with my hardware in particular. I think Linux works better if you have an Intel CPU. As for graphics cards, AMD is preferred. With NVIDIA, they're still kind of getting around to making it work natively through NVIDIA, not through third party. But I do think one day we will get to Linux being a great competitor to the desktop market. When, I don't know. But when you have Android, Chrome OS, now Steam OS contributing with expanding the philosophy of open source operating systems, it seems like it's a great way, in a great direction we're heading to. Overall, my experience with it, I would say it's 8 out of 10. I was not shooting for perfection, but there are those few little quirks that you don't have to think about while using Windows, but you have to find alternatives and plan ahead, or do a lot of research while you're using Linux, which takes away from your productivity. Again, your miles will vary, but this is just my overall review, my month and a half of using PopOS. I will try again sometime in the future, but I think I'll be using my Steam Deck more with time and also getting more used to Arch. And I think that's going to be, going forward, I think that's going to be my biggest introductory to Linux and getting more used to it, along with RetroPie and all these other projects that I've been working on with my server projects with Docker and Ubuntu and whatnot. So, but for desktop, it seems promising for the future. Yeah, so if you made it this far, thank you. That's all I could say for now. Stay tuned.